This is Andy Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher, reporting in again, and I still have yet to see to the proper decor. I think I'll just have to break into some building where there's a chalkboard, or at least a whiteboard. A whiteboard is what you see these days for some reason. Back when I was teaching, which wasn't that long ago, I always just had, well, not always, but generally speaking, had a whiteboard to use with markers. I don't know why that's replaced the chalkboard and chalk dust and chalk, the good old sound of chalking on a chalkboard. But it has happened. In any case, I'm still in this room that looks rather nondescript, and I'm not dressed in any particular way or giving off any particular demeanor or anything really in my appearance that really denotes English teacherness. But you'll just have to take my word for it. I am indeed a right-wing English teacher, and not just any right-wing English teacher, but your right-wing English teacher. And I wanted to report in with a new missive that is a little bit late. Last time I began a sort of free-form discussion of the big four in the Shakespeare canon, the four plays that are generally thought of as Shakespeare's finest, the most impressive work that the Bard has to offer, among other works that are also great, but these are the greatest of the great. And those are, of course, as I said, Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, and Macbeth. Those are the big four, as is generally thought of. And last time I discussed my general thoughts in a more free-form kind of way with respect to Hamlet and with respect to King Lear. Just sort of the vibe that gets communicated by these plays. Hamlet, of course, those of you who know me, who have visited my other channel, which is just my name, Andy Nowicki, know that Hamlet is an obsession of mine. I've come back to it many, many times before. But the last time, on the last broadcast I did under this title, I also discussed a bit of King Lear. And again, the two things that really stood out with Hamlet is first of all the character of Hamlet and the way in which he draws the reader or the viewer in with his towering intellect, but also with the many demons that he's wrestling with. He's trying to figure out the course of action to take under these very trying circumstances. And he feels his way along, but he also feels his way along quite brilliantly. And even the mistakes that he makes are brilliant mistakes, like his decision to refrain from killing Claudius at the moment where he's knelt in prayer. Well, I mean, there's one reason why that, of course, you would think that you think the reason that he would give for not killing Claudius at that moment is that there's something unjust or improper about attacking a man, hacking him with a sword until he's dead while he's knelt in prayer, there's something ignoble about that. But Hamlet doesn't think that. That's not the reason that he dreams up. Hamlet always has something that you wouldn't necessarily expect, that you wouldn't necessarily think of yourself. Hamlet's reason for refraining from killing Claudius, which proves to be mistaken at that moment in Act 3, is that he thinks that Claudius is actually repentant, and he doesn't want to send him to heaven because he thinks to himself, well, he killed my father. My father didn't get a chance to repent properly of his sins. I've seen him. I know the state he's in right now. He's in misery. He's in agony It's some form of purgatorial state, but in any case, he's a long way from heaven, and he thinks he doesn't want to give Claudius, his murderer, the chance to go straight to heaven. But as it turns out, Claudius isn't even repentant. He's just trying to will himself to be repentant at that moment. So the thing, anyway, that's just an example, but the thing that stands out about Hamlet is the endless scheming of it. It's a very apt play to forecast the coming of the surveillance state. And of course, as long as there has been a state, there has been a surveillance state to some extent or degree. But what we see in Hamlet is people spying, everybody's spying. There's so much spying going on, so many people peeking in, listening in to what others are saying. And it's mostly the king and his minions, although Hamlet ends up doing a bit of it himself. He hides behind the curtain, and that's at the moment where he mistakes his would-be father-in-law Polonius for his better, as he calls him, Claudius, and ends up killing him at a certain opportune moment, a moment of rashness, which contrasts very sharply with Hamlet's general deliberation. Again, there's so many seeming contradictions with Hamlet, but yet they all seem to fit together just like the pieces of a puzzle fit together. And that's part of the fascination of the play Hamlet. Now, King Lear, I discussed last time. The things that stand out about that play as well, and how the impression that it leaves the reader or the viewer with is just this pervading sense of absolute devastation. The way that it ends, it's like your hopes are crushed, and it's devastating, it's heartbreaking to see. But of course, in a way, it's, in a way, justice is served, because not because of the murder of Cordelia. Cordelia, of course, was the only really upstanding character in the Lear family by far. But Lear himself comes around and eventually sees the error of his ways, sees how he was just behaving like a megalomaniacal narcissist, demanding that he be praised by all of his daughters and so forth, and how that really led to his own undermining, because his daughters were even more narcissistic and more ruthless and more sociopathic than he was. So he still has the love of Cordelia, but then, of course, at the end of the play, he loses her in what seems like a gratuitous moment where we thought everything was going to be okay with her, but before the play ends, she's put to death, and it seems like it's, we thought that it was going to be averted, but anyway, order has been restored, the bad guys have been routed, and yet there's utter devastation, utter despair, an utter sense of heartbreak that the reader, or more properly, viewer, since these are plays that are meant to be watched, is left with. So on to Othello and Macbeth. Now, these two plays are interesting to look at in tandem, I think, because they're both about terrible, grave injustices being committed. They both are depictions of immensely evil characters who do really stunningly awful things. In Othello, of course, it's the character of Iago, and Iago is, more than any of Shakespeare's other villains, more than Claudius, more than Macbeth, or Lady Macbeth even, Interesting that Lady Macbeth has really more of a, that there's more of a dread that attends her name than the name of Macbeth, even when, they were both pretty bad. And ultimately Macbeth himself, Mr. Macbeth, was worse. He actually ended up going farther. But Iago is the villain, like the uber villain. He's the one that when you think of his name, this is the real, this is the villainous villain. This is Shakespeare's ultimate villain, and it's a name that is infused with infamy. So again, I said these two plays are interesting to look at in comparison with one another, given that they are both about, they both concern, in some ways, a thematic similarity in that they're both examinations of evil. But in Macbeth, the evil is, we see the entire play through the lens of the evildoer. He's the main character. He's the one that in a way, whether we want to or not, we're forced to relate to him, to Macbeth. And in a way, both of the plays actually. I was going to say in a way Macbeth is more frightening, but in a way they both are frightening because we see this this fitful decline in both Macbeth and in Othello, in the character of Othello himself. These characters both get seduced into evil, into undermining. Now, Macbeth, though, the character of Macbeth strikes us as by far the more culpable of the two. More culpable than Othello, because Othello is just being tricked. Othello is a good-hearted man who is simply naive. He's got this blind spot with Iago, who he thinks is just his good, faithful friend, who wouldn't steer him wrong. And he couldn't be wronger about that. But Iago ends up tricking him, making him think that his wife is a whore, that his wife is sleeping around on him and making a fool of him, and just ends up just infusing that is Othello, with rage and heartbreak, and causing him to ultimately commit murder. Now, Othello is still responsible for the murder that he commits when he murders his wife, Desdemona, but he has been lured into this maelstrom, this psychological maelstrom by Iago. Whereas Macbeth, yes, in a way he also gets lured in by his wife, who at first is much more enthusiastic about this whole task. She's much more like, all right, well, here's our chance. Let's kill this inconvenient thane over here. Let's kill the King of England, Duncan. Let's just knock him off left and right. Do what we got to do to ascend to the heights of power. And Lady Macbeth talks about how, in a memorable speech, she discusses how she wishes that she could have all of her. She asked the spirits to come and unsex her, to take away all of her anything about her that could be seen as lenient or merciful, in a feminine sense, just to become hard, like a man would. So at first she is the more harder-willed of the two, but at that point it's mostly just talk. And she gets Macbeth, who also wants it. I mean, he from the beginning he's hungry for power. He knows, and he's a violent, he's a warrior. He's skilled in the ways of battle, and he knows how to shed blood. Good, you know, he's hacked a few guys to pieces in his time, and he's gonna hack a few more to pieces before he's done. So in a way, again, Lady Macbeth can be said to be the equivalent of what Iago is to Othello, and yet, really, we see Macbeth as a much more willing participant in it all, even though he's more hesitant at first, and after the commission of the murder of Duncan, he's like, oh shit, this is really bad. I'm not sure if I can live with myself after this. Everything is going to be pain and misery now, and there is no more sleep. Macbeth has killed sleep. That's what he says about himself. He refers to himself in third person there. And Lady Macbeth is sort of saying, "Oh well, don't think too much about those kinds of things." She was the one who was at first encouraging, "Let their thoughts be bloody," as Hamlet says, or nothing worth. That they be completely ruthless and steel themselves against all thoughts of mercy and all notions of anything but, again, going really hard against anyone who's in the way of them attaining power. Including, as it turns out, including youth, including a boy, the boy who is the son of Macduff, and also other people who had been friends of his, like Banquo, friends and allies and comrades fighting on the same side. He makes a decision that power is his supreme goal, and again, at first he fools everybody, just like Iago fools Othello at first, or not just at first, just about all the way through the play, and not just Othello. Nobody seems to suspect Iago of being just this. He's so evil that it's difficult to grasp, to put one's finger on, because he has no seeming motive other than a hatred of Othello, which just seems to be so out of bounds to any possible motive that and then he never elaborates, never explains anything about, even after he's found out and after he's captured. It never really, we don't ever hear, well, it was because I was abused as a child, or we don't ever get any kind of explanations like that with Iago, not like with what's his name, Bates, I can't remember his first name, the psycho, Tony Perkins of the Bates Motel. We kind of got, in that movie, we kind of got that tacked on ending where it's like, oh, well, this is the reason why he became the way that he became. With Iago, we never find out why. But with Macbeth, it's just, it's all about power. It's all about wanting power. It's all about the allure of power. But Macbeth also, there's a certain kind of sadness to seeing this man's moral decline, because at the beginning of the play, he's not a bad guy. He's just entertaining bad thoughts. But then he crosses the line, of course, with the encouragement of his wife, and then goes way, way, way across the line, and eventually his wife says, "Whoa, I can't handle any more of this. Out, damned spot." And loses her mind. Loses her mind in a way that's interestingly parallel to Ophelia losing her mind in Hamlet, except in Ophelia's case, there is no personal culpability. She's simply lost her sanity due to what has happened to her. She's more of a passive recipient of the trauma. But with Lady Macbeth, it's because she's aware of what she's done. And it drives her crazy, drives her mad, makes her think that there's blood all over her and she can never get it off. Hence the line, out, out, damned spot. Now, Macbeth himself, however, keeps going in that direction, even after his wife has kind of had her fill. You know, she talked a good game, but she's only a woman in the context of the play. I mean, and she can, you know, talk about the commission of bloody violence and offing this guy, this king, and this thane, and this boy, and so forth and so on. But Macbeth, he keeps going. He keeps going and going and going and going and going until the very end. And what we see at the end, when he's eventually slain by Macduff and his head is brought out, and that's the last we see of him, is his decapitated head. That's, you know, representative of what has taken place with him, his dismemberment. You know, it's representational of the state of his soul, because his reason, his what we would call his conscience, his sense of proportion or proper behavior, all the things that you know, you would think he would have in his head, that was all gone. He lost it. He lost his head well before he ever lost his head, literally. But with Macbeth, even though it's a bloody play and a disturbing play, and even though there's some kind of pathos in seeing Macbeth, you know, and his decline, and how far down he plunges, you know, and how hellward is the trajectory of his soul, you know, as the play goes on and on. At the same time, we don't ever see him enjoying what you know, the spoils of his labor, as it were. There's never a scene where he and Lady Macbeth are like, ah, wow, it sure is great to luxuriate in this kingdom that we gained by murdering Duncan and blaming it on his sons and so forth. You know, we never see him. This is something that he's done supposedly to enhance himself and to, you know, to bring to bring himself to power, and to let, you know, what he had in mind was that his family would be able to reign, that he and his wife would be able to have sons, and you know, continue as royalty. But of course, the witches say, nope, you'll be king, but your sons will not be king. The sons of another character instead will be king. So it just doesn't, it never happens. And Lady Macbeth is barren, apparently. And she wishes that, again, she talks about how, near the beginning of the play, she talks about how she would, if she had children, she would, you know, pluck them from her breast when they were nursing and smash their heads against a wall, if that's what it would take. Again, she's cold-blooded, hardcore in her rhetoric, but there's ultimately a softness. There is a softness and a certain femininity to Lady Macbeth that leads to her ultimately not being able to go on. And Macbeth, however, you know, by contrast, plunges right through, killing and killing and killing and killing and killing and killing and killing right through the end. And in fact, Lady Macbeth early on says, I would have killed him myself if his face didn't, talking about Duncan, if his face didn't remind me of my father's. So we see, you know, even in the earlier stages of the play, when she was still, you know, hardcore in the way that she talked about it all, she still had a softness and a vulnerability and a, you know, a certain feminine reticence. You know, she needed her husband to do the dirty work, which he did. So with Macbeth, just to bring my thoughts on Macbeth to a close here, not, you know, not that these are any kind of final thoughts, because there's much more that could be said about the play, but this is just, you know, me throwing stuff out there about Shakespeare's Big Four. But with Macbeth, it's a play about blood and revenge, and you know, it's bloody and it's terrible. And of course, the same annoying people who call King Lear Lear, you know, I was on a production of Lear last year. You know, they say, oh, don't say Macbeth, say the Scottish play, because there's some stupid idea. There's I guess some superstition that Macbeth carries, that the name of Macbeth is something that brings bad luck. It's an interesting superstition, and maybe there's some truth to it, but it's just these annoying theater people that always say, oh, the Scottish play, oh, not Macbeth, the Scottish play, oh, and Lear, oh. They're kind of annoying. But anyway, Macbeth ends with a sense of justice, because although we pity both of the Macbeths to a degree, ultimately we hold them responsible for what they have done. Whereas with Othello, even though Othello, you know, still, you know, we're all responsible for our actions, but in Othello's case, he really gets brainwashed. I mean, he really gets what is the proper word? What's the word that everybody uses these days? Gaslighted? Is that the right word or phrase to use in this context? In any case, you know, Iago tells him these things that he's seen that imply that his wife is being unfaithful to him. His wife, who is in truth, you know, very faithful to him, who would be, you know, who's a saintly woman, who you know, similar to Cordelia in King Lear. This is a woman who you know, will bear any kind of long suffering that she has to, but would never do anything to harm her husband or to be unfaithful to him. But Iago has Othello's ear, and Iago tricks Othello into believing that Desdemona is a whore and that he's being betrayed by her. And he comes to believe it. And I have to say that, and maybe this is just me, I actually find Othello to be difficult to watch, the most difficult to watch of all four of these plays, simply because there's something about the whole idea that this good man, Othello, is being convinced, being talked into thinking something is monstrously wrong, that his wife is doing something monstrously wrong when she isn't. And there's nothing we can do. You know, it's like we're just sitting there helpless as the audience, watching this take place, watching this evil, wicked, cruel villain, Iago, just, you know, all the while pretending to be such a nice guy, pretending to be such a good friend, pretending that he's just, you know, he doesn't really want to tell him these things, but he's, you know, he pretends that he sort of says, well, okay, but I'm not going to talk about that. And then Othello says, wait, what do you mean? You're not going to talk about what? No, it'd be better for me not to say anything. So let's just go about our business here. No, no, come on, tell me, tell me. Well, all right. Well, the other night I saw Desdemona go into the house with that guy, and I'm sure there's nothing to it, though. I mean, don't think twice about it. I just, it kind of caught my attention, but I'm sorry I said anything about it. Just never mind. Forget I talked about it. What? My wife with another man? That can't be. That can't be. Well, and then it goes on from there. So I can see why there might be. I can see why for a certain type of viewer there might be a certain kind of perverse enjoyment that you obtain from watching this happen. But for me, it's just like I just want to shout, no, don't listen to him. Come on, Othello, snap out of it. And so Othello's decline, into madness and into the commission of an evil act, the murder of his wife through strangulation, that's somehow much more difficult to have to endure, because it's easier to see that it's easier to see Othello as someone who's just been tricked by a man who's completely unscrupulous and who's also, very, very diabolically clever. Um, but in Macbeth's case, well, he's doing these terrible things because he's choosing to do them. Um, but there is an interesting parallel in that Macbeth goes through hell, and he winds up in hell at the end. But after he kills Duncan, he realizes he's killed sleep. He'll never be able to sleep again. And for the rest of the play, he's just kind of wandering around. Uh, he's not happy. He's not like, oh well, I'm powerful now, so at least I've got that. That doesn't seem to be his mindset. And Othello goes from being, having this peace of mind and having this dignity of character and nobility of mien. He goes from that to being just this utter raving, uh, angry, rage-filled uh, um, seeker of bloody revenge against his blameless wife. And it's again, for me, and I'd be interested to know if anybody else feels this way. For me, it's a very unpleasant thing to watch. It's not really something I would care to watch. I'll be frank. The other three, if you told me you had tickets to see the any of the other three plays, including Lear, well, there I go, including Lear, including King Lear, um, even as depressing as it is, it would still, I would still say, yeah, let's go see it. And if it's Hamlet, I'm like, yeah, 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 all right, Hamlet, woo. But if it's Othello, I'll go. I mean, I'll say, yeah, that'll be neat, and it'll be cool to see a Shakespeare play, and it'll be interesting to see how Iago is depicted. How the actor chooses to play the role. But I think it'll just be uh, it's a little torturous to watch this good man get tricked into doing this grave evil. Um, Now, ultimately, in the end, he does repent of his act. Ultimately, Iago does get found out. So again, it's not like at the end, like I was saying with King Lear. It's not like evil completely prevails, but still there is some lingering, really something that uh, leaves a really bad taste in one's mouth. Um, about seeing this good man just decline, just be led into decline by the man who he thinks is his good friend, but is actually his worst enemy. Um, something about that I find really disquieting and unpleasant. But it's a good play. Nothing against Shakespeare or whoever the author of these plays are. I'm not even going to get into that whole question. But so that wraps up my thoughts about the big four of Shakespeare. Let me know what y'all think, if y'all think anything, and I'll talk to y'all soon. This is Andy Nowicki, your right-wing English teacher, signing off.